Hello, everyone. This is Ed K. Smith here with my lovely co-host, Lois K. Smith, for another
Morning.
episode, hey Lois, of the My Livelihood podcast. And we're exceptionally fortunate today to have a good friend, a long-time friend, Mr. Gihan Perera, on the show. And Gihan is a business futurist and is the author of The Future of Leadership. And Gihan predicts that digital literacy, such as online collaboration, innovation in remote teams, and presenting online will be crucial in the future and currently. So welcome, Gihan. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, hi Ed. Hi Lois. Great
Hi,
to chat.
Gihan.
So yes, as I said, we have known Gihan for a long time. I was thinking this morning as I was brushing my teeth, as you do, how long have we known Gihan for? And I would say it would have to be close to 25 years.
Yeah, I was going to guess 20, Ed. So that sounds about right. So definitely.
Yeah, that is scary. But Gihan is one of these people that we've known through something called National Speakers Association, now called Professional Speakers Association. That was how we first met Gihan back in the day. Gihan is a prolific author. I think you've written 10 books now, or is it 11? 10?
Yeah, I think something like that. I think the Disruption, but Future of Leadership was the 10th.
The 10th, yep.
Design, I think it's 11th. Yeah.
Wow,
Yes.
fantastic. I've got some catching up to do, Gihan. I've just had one so far.
That's amazing. So we wanted to have Gihan on and to discuss the topic of the future-proof, future for business, and just get his thoughts on how things are at the moment with everything that's been going on with the whole COVID scenario. It's made a lot of businesses have to change, and the overused word pivot of what they do. So we wanted to have that conversation, but we'll get to that in a sec. But we'd like to do a bit of a wind back, Gihan. Who is Gihan? Where does he come from? What was he doing before all this future stuff? Because we know some of the stories, but so let's go back to university days, because I know you went to university. What was it you were doing back in those days? And you went to UWA, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, I've lived in Australia most of my life. We came here when I was 9, and yes, I grew up. Went to school in Perth, went to university at the University of Western Australia. I was kind of the only techie person in my family. So my family is mostly more arts oriented, but I did a maths and computer science degree. And then my first career was as a software developer. So I was working for this little software company in Perth. And that was a really great experience because it gave me the chance to kind of use the skills straight out of uni. So what I learned, I was able to apply straight away. But it also allowed me to expand into other skills. And because we only had 20 people in our company, everyone was expected to do everything. So if I was working after hours, I'd be answering the phones. If I was within a couple of years, I got into small leadership positions. So I learned to present in front of groups. I became a assistant project manager for a small project. Then I became a project manager. So I really got those opportunities because I was working in a small company, things that were outside my area of expertise, but things that have turned out to be really valuable in the future.
Fantastic. So you were running a web design business as well for a while there. So that was back in the day when web design was so much harder to do compared to what it is. I mean, it's still challenging for most people, really. But the options, you really had to be someone that was technical and have coding skills to be able to develop a website. It wasn't plug and play as much as it is now. And back in those days, I think a lot of people were still just getting used to what the internet is. Was it even going to be around still? There was lots of people saying it was a fad. So how did you deal, being a technical person, what did you see of the future of the internet when you were starting to get involved in it from your side? What was some of the thoughts you had about how it was going to head?
Yeah, that's right, Ed. And I remember I really admired my early clients because they were the ones who took a chance on it. They were the pioneers. And it's true. There were people saying to me, "Oh, this internet thing, do you think is a bit of a fad?" And there were enough people who were willing to take a chance on it and on me for me to have a viable business. And it was one of Australia's first web design businesses. And I decided to just focus on the people who were saying, "Yep, I want this," rather than the people who maybe needed it but needed to be convinced. So I was lucky that I had enough clients who were willing to say, "Yeah, let's give this a go." And you're right, Ed, at the time it was probably, we were working with small businesses. It would probably take about 3 months to build a website for them. Probably cost about $5,000, and it did require the technical expertise. And in some ways, I was lucky that I came across the web, because it wasn't something that was part of, definitely wasn't there when I was studying at university. And it wasn't even part of my role as a software developer. We were developing software to interface with mining equipment and titration devices from Alcoa. So it was kind of like that technical software. But I was very lucky that I had a couple of years that I was working in the UK. I went on secondment because this UK company bought our little company in Western Australia.
Cool.
And so I got the chance to work in the UK for a couple of years. And towards the end of that, as that was winding down, they still wanted me there, but I didn't have like 40 hours of work a week. So I went to my boss and said, "Look, I feel a bit guilty here. You're paying me for this time, but you're not really using all of it. I just feel like I'm not really getting value." And he said, no, we need you there for that time. So I said, "What else should I be doing? Like, I don't really have things to fill my hours." And he said, "Oh, why don't you go and surf the web?" And I said, "What's the web?" Right? And
get paid to do that, Gihan. That's a dream job.
And look,
excellent.
At the time, Lois, there were literally a couple of hundred websites.
Yeah.
And so Yahoo, which was so this is long before Google. Yahoo was the directory of the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
And all the websites in the world were listed on this one page.
Yeah.
And there were, even at the time, very few of us had access to the web. So my boss made sure that when I logged into my computer, I actually had access to the web. So we still had email, and we still had file transfers, and we had bulletin boards that we could get access to, but getting access to the web was a big thing. So I had access to that. So I was looking around. So I say that, one day I looked at every website in the world, which is
not an exaggeration.
Yeah, that's right. And so because of that, I discovered what the web was, and then I could help other people when I started my web design company when I first came back to Australia. So until then I'd been an employee, and I came back to Australia. I had a contract for a couple of years. There was a bit of a crossroads. There's a bit of a big decision I had to make, because the tech company that I was working for in Australia, they got bought by a company in the US, and there was a good chance that I'd get to go and work in San Francisco, which was something that I'd been thinking about for a long time. I thought, great, go and work in Silicon Valley. But I had to make the decision, do I do that, or do I give up my job and start a business of my own, because I could see this potential for this web. And I decided to, probably the biggest business decision I ever made was to actually start the business.
Yes.
And, so that got me going on a completely different trajectory.
That's fantastic. And that showed a lot of courage. And I think in a way, Gihan, when you were talking earlier about in your first role where you answered the phones if there was no one there, and you got to do all those things and then be exposed to a different culture over in the UK as well, and all those things probably prepared you, do you think, a little bit more to say yes, to back yourself? What do you think it was that made you back yourself?
Yes, I think I think you're right, Lois, there's an element of courage to it, but also a huge element of naivety.
Love it.
That comes in handy a lot of the time.
Yep. I had no idea what I was letting myself in for.
That's great.
I have no regrets, absolutely no regrets, and I'm glad I did it. And in some ways, I'm glad I was naive at the time that I did it, because if I'd known what the first couple of years of running a business was like, I might have decided I might have chosen not to do it.
Sure.
So there was that, but you're completely right, Lois, that the broader experience that I got working at ComSys, which was much broader than just me, just head down, bum up, just doing software programming, that has really helped me, in good stead. And the idea of being a manager and being a leader, and I was very naive about that as well. But I learned a lot at that time in my early 20s, having that kind of managerial responsibility and accountability, but doing that and doing it badly to start with, but getting better and understanding what it was like to be a leader of people, not just a programmer of code, was a big thing in my professional development.
Yeah, that's huge. And for a while there, Gihan, you did, I'm assuming, a lot of it yourself, like you really kind of bootstrapped and got things going yourself. But was there a time then you started to, again, engage other people and perhaps outsource, maybe would be the terminology?
Yeah, that's right, Lois. And in some ways, so one of the best bosses that I ever had when I was an employee was somebody who came in from, he was South African. He came to Perth, like many South Africans do. He was looking around for a job, and he was I feel like he was a professional project manager. And he came into our team, and he didn't know anything about the software that we were using. I mean, he'd worked in tech companies before, but he wasn't a programmer. He was more of a people leader, and he was good at organization, logistics, and things like that. And I learned so much from him because he was hands off. So, and by necessity. So he didn't try and jump in and try and solve problems and fix bugs and work in the development team. Whereas I had a little bit, because I had a little bit of knowledge and I had kind of expertise in that area, I was too tempted to jump in and do that, fix problems, do the code, because I had worked in this area for a while. So I knew that I could do it, but I remember Bruce taking me aside one day and saying, look, I know you can do this, but while you're doing that, who's doing the stuff that you should be doing? Who's like being employed with project manager? Yeah. It's a real life. Looking back on it now, Lois, I think, well, that's pretty obvious. But at the time, it was a real light bulb moment for me to go, absolutely, I can do this twice as quickly as somebody who was on my team. But there's other stuff that wasn't getting done and that nobody was doing and that I was being paid to do. So yes, you're right, Lois. I did start engaging people and I started employing people, and the business obviously did a lot better as a result of that. It did really well. And looking back at it now, it's obvious that it did well because of that. But at the time, it was still like, how can I afford to pay somebody to do this when I know I can do it myself? And again, I think back to Bruce's question, who's doing what you should be doing?
Yes, it's a bit of a leap of faith, and it's something Ed and I have tussled with a bit, and certainly I'm moving a lot more into that space now myself, so I might be hitting up for some tips there, Gihan, which is great. I love what you were talking about. Sorry, Ed, I just got one more question on
you go, Lo.
I'm on a roll here because I wanted to talk, Gihan, about when you were in the company and they got you to surf the web of the 100 websites. You talk about something in the skills, which we'll get to in a moment, but active learning. And I think active learning is so important, but isn't it great when someone else pays for it? Or, you have to do it in order to move ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the differences now, Lois. So I was very lucky that I was in that position where, basically my boss said, we need you here. So just do whatever you want until we need to call on you because you know this software really well. So I was very lucky to be in the position that I could do learning on somebody else's dime with permission, with approval. And the best companies are still doing that. They're still providing lots of learning opportunities for their employees, for their people. But I reckon it's so much more than that now. And all of us should be responsible for being active learners and look at different ways of learning and be open to just always being a lifelong learner. Because I think that it's one of those things that, in my parents' days, so my dad, he's an accountant and auditor. He's now retired, but he was kind of used to the idea that he may have worked in one company for a long time. And because, my parents made some very, very big decisions to take their family to another, take them to a whole other country for their kids' education. And so as a result of that, he did move jobs. But, there were people in his generation who were happy with one company who would look after them for their whole career. That's just not the case anymore. And the company was expected to look after everything that he would need in his professional development. And now I think all of us should be responsible for our own professional development. And I'm sure there's some generations there Gen Ys thinking, yeah, well, that's pretty obvious. I know that I need to do this, and I will do it. Again, another thing that I remember having a chat with somebody who was a millennial, a Gen Y. This is many years ago. We were just having coffee after some training course that we both went to, and she was talking about careers, and she said that whenever she applies for a job, she looks at the criteria for the job, and looks at the job application, and she says, I want to make sure that, obviously I need to make sure that I can meet some of the requirements for the job, but I also want to make sure that the job is going to give me learning opportunities as well. And again, for me, I'd never thought about it that way before. And this is like 10 or 15 years ago. Yes. And now, like, Christy was way ahead of her time. But this is the millennial mindset, the Gen Y mindset, and especially now the Gen Zs as well, who are now moving into the workforce. They just assume that they've got to be responsible for their own learning, and they expect their employers as well to make sure that they can help them with their learning, not only with deep learning in their expertise, but also broad learning that they can take elsewhere.
Yes, I see it very much as a partnership. It's disappointing sometimes when I'm working with people who have received a redundancy, unfortunately, and they say, oh, I ask them what training they've done in the last year or so, and they say, oh no, my employer didn't provide any. And of course, we just can't have that mindset anymore. It's got to be, that we do our own, and that we are always learning and stretching ourselves, but also that the organisations want you to have certain skills, then obviously they need to invest as well. And I know you do a lot of work, Gihan, in organisations and helping prepare them for the future of work as well.
Yeah, look, and I've been very lucky, Lois, that because of some of the organisations I've worked with, they're just fantastic in the way that they look after their employees, and they look after learning for their employees. And it's not just a case of go and do this training workshop and then you can tick a box and you've learned this skill. It's a combination of online learning. They actively encourage mentoring within the organization, even outside. They have opportunities for shadowing and job swapping. And some of them are really proactive about that. So I love the idea of doing a job swap for a while. So for 3 months, you swap jobs with somebody else, or you take on a role outside your area, and then the HR and the organization gives you and your manager a lot of support into how to make this work effectively. And they're really pushing this because they care not only about what that does for the organization, but it also what it does for the individual. So I've been really lucky to work with organizations like that, and I'm sure you know organizations like that, Lois.
Absolutely.
And at the other end of the scale as well, people who don't do anything for their people.
Very much.
Yeah, I think it comes down to always being curious. And I know you and I, Gihan, we're the same age, and people are going to have to guess what that is. We're not going to tell them. But I know we're always curious about what's going on. And I think that's one of the not advantages, but I feel very fortunate that I've come from a place of not having technology per se, as in the internet. It didn't exist. So we knew what it was like before, and now we know what it's like with. Don't necessarily know what it's like in the future, but that's what we're going to have a chat about as well. But I think there's I would love to be in the mind of someone, and we've got our daughter Sasha, who's 21 going on 22, who grew up not knowing anything else but having the internet. Like, she doesn't know what it was like before. It's just how it is. So I think, do we have an advantage, the fact that we knew what it was like before, or does that slow us down? Is it better just coming from a completely fresh perspective? And what do you think of that?
Oh, look, I think everyone, we just have whatever we have, Ed. So you can talk about whether we had the internet or we didn't have the internet, and then now we do have the internet. There's a whole bunch of other things that now young adults going into the workforce now, there are things that they didn't have and they now have. And
true.
You've seen Generation Y saying, oh, these Gen Z kids now, they don't know how lucky they are.
We didn't have smartphones.
Yeah, that's right. So everyone has whatever they have, Ed. And I think some people who are really good with it and who really figure out how to make it work. So, and I'm sure Sasha's one of those people. So my stepdaughter Abby is another one of those people. So she is highly connected. So she's about the same age. So she's
Yep.
21 and a half at the moment.
Right.
And when we go out, so like, I particularly remember this example. I remember going out to with Abby to lunch, just she and I. We were just having lunch.
Mm-hmm.
We went to one of our favorite Italian restaurants, and so we ordered food. As soon as the food arrived, what's the first thing that she does?
Took a photo.
Takes out a phone,
Post
takes a photo, posts it on Instagram.
Yeah.
And then she puts the phone away, and we have a really engaging conversation over lunch. Right? So she's figured out how to use technology well, because she has an interesting, engaging, in-person conversation, and she's posted it on Instagram, and her friends say to her later when they catch up, she goes, they go, oh, Abs, you had, how was the squid pasta that you had for lunch? So
yeah.
figured out how to make it work really well. So she
absolutely.
doesn't see smartphones as an impediment to communication. She's actually figured out how to make it work for communication, but also not get in the way of when she wants to have in-person conversations and in-person engagement. So I don't think it's the technology, the internet,
you're right, it's not.
TikTok, it's not good or bad. It's how you make it work for you, and
absolutely
how you figure out how to make it work for you.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things I come across is it's the attitude of the person who's engaged in the technology, because there's plenty of people I know, I come across who are my age, who can barely send a text message, and they're very resistant to learning or engaging in whatever is coming along, because they're stuck in how it was rather than how it is. So I think that's a danger, and it comes back down to that curiosity and wanting to learn and doing professional development. If you just sort of say, well, this is where I am and I don't want to learn anymore, then you're really going to be coming up against it. So
there's definitely that openness and adaptability, isn't there?
Yep.
Gihan, I wondered if you could comment on the much maligned, well, we often hear about soft skills and hard skills, and I tend to, when I hear soft skills, I tend to bristle at that label, which I know a lot of people do. What's your take on it?
So why do you bristle at it, Lois?
Well, I think it's just the word soft. It's almost like it's faffy or easy or something like that. You know, like it seems to almost denigrate it as being something fluid and easy. And we know it's actually probably harder than the hard skills if you're going to classify them that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I do too. I don't like the term either. So I was just curious to know your reason behind it, because I totally agree with you. It's people do say the soft skills are the hardest. And for the future, I don't like the term. I don't like to make the distinction between soft and hard skills. What I think, I'd rather think of deep skills and wide skills.
Yes.
So interesting.
Deep skills are your expertise. So whatever you have expertise in, whether it's what you learned at school or uni or TAFE, it may be that if you're still working in that area, or it may be some others. You may have switched careers and it's some other skills. So for me, my deep skills now are about being a futurist. So always thinking about futurism, learning more about it, being up to date with it, hanging out with futurists, reading a lot, consuming a lot of information, as well as my other deep skills are being a presenter. So I'm obsessed about being a better presenter. What do I need to know about speaking at conferences? What new technologies available? How are audience demographics of dynamics changing? So those are my deep skills, because that's how that's my expertise, and I want to continue developing that expertise. Then the wide skills are the transferable skills, and a lot of them are what people call the soft skills, Lois. So communication, leadership, being influential, being able to collaborate, thinking about big picture thinking, creativity, innovation. But there are also some of the skills that you wouldn't necessarily think of as soft skills, like being good with media, like new media. So how comfortable are you adopting and adapting new media channels as part of your communication strategy? It's about being good with numbers. So now, especially now, as we're going through this pandemic, there are a lot of numbers being thrown about, and you should be comfortable. You don't have to be an epidemiologist, but you should understand things like what do we talk about when we talk about mortality rate and cases, and why are some graphs shown with a logarithmic scale. Now, again, like that's stuff that I learned in maths, and actually it's what kids learn in high school in maths, and yet many of those things are forgotten or left behind. I think that numeracy basic numeracy, being able to interpret a graph, being able to look at a chart and being able to ask intelligent questions about it and being able to make well-informed decisions about it, that's one of those broad, wide skills that's going to be transferable across many, many industries. So yeah, that's why I don't like the hard versus soft, because for the reason you said as well, Lois, like soft skill sounds like it's easy, it's a bit cushy,
fluffy, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not that. It's, I think you should have wide skills which are transferable.
Definitely.
As well as, once you're in a particular job or particular role, then you want to have those deep skills, and you want to be an active learner in both those areas, both the deep and the wide.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very much an integration of the two, isn't it? I wonder, Gihan, if we can lobby LinkedIn to change their headings in the skills section to deep and wide. And because for some people, they're not aware, they used to just have all their skills listed, and then LinkedIn went and put them into categories. And I think they use technical and interpersonal and other. And interestingly, a lot of mine, because my deep skills are career counselling, career development, coaching, mentoring, all of those skills, they put all of those into interpersonal. So I sort of had to go, what technical things have I got? And I've got some, fortunately. But it's interesting. It's interpretations a lot of the time, isn't it, of what people perceive these to be.
Exactly. And even that feeling of that the word technical makes it sound like it's about technology and numbers and AI and automation, when it's not.
Yes,
it's like that's exactly what I mean by deep skills.
Yes.
So in whatever area of expertise you have, and it could be in humanities. So we've had this debate recently because
I want to ask you about this.
Funding around humanities courses versus science courses and so on. And again, I think it's the wrong question. Like, so if you're saying the government is funding degrees that are going to give you the skills which are going to give you employment, I think that's reasonable. No problem at all with that. And the skills that you learn in a humanities course, the deep skills are going to be obviously different than the skills that you learn in a science-oriented course, but the broad skills should be the same. So when I did my computer science degree, we learned about problem solving, we learned about communication. Abby doing a physiotherapy degree, she's learning about ethics and social issues around different people from different backgrounds. So all of those broad skills, those wide skills, should be part of every university course, and then you decide what are the deep skills that you need if you're an anthropologist versus a software developer versus a physiotherapist.
That's
and again,
right.
Deep and wide.
You must have had some interesting conversations around your dinner table, because you said that a lot of your family come from the humanities and you were the science-based person, so that must be a good debate there.
And I think I really like that, Lois. I really like that. It is interesting. And so one of the things with our family, which is a little bit of a different thing, is that we have always been okay with having like fiery debates. Right? We'd have wonderful topics, right? And really interesting topics. And we would have people arguing, and then at the end of it, it's all okay. So my brother-in-law, Neil, who married my sister, so he
Neil,
said...
I know Neil.
Yeah, you know
Neil.
Yeah.
If you're listening, Neil. Hey, Neil.
So he said we were like a little bit like the Waltons, right? We'd have these big arguments, and then after that, at the end of dinner, wash up the dishes, and then it's like, good night, John boy, and everyone's happy because we were arguing about the content. It was like we always play the ball, not the man, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
It meant that we did have some interesting discussions in our family, and it was all okay. Like, we were all okay about it afterwards. There was never any resentment about it. There was never any leftover anger. But my parents always were open for us to have those sort of debates, which was really good for us in a family that we grew up that way.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic.
And are they very proud to say Gihan is a futurist when they meet other people and they're talking about you?
Well, see, it's interesting. So my parents, they were always, I was having a conversation with my dad, and I said, my sister's now the head of English at a private school in Perth. You must be really proud. Like, you came out to Australia and she's kind of gone on a career path. And she goes, and my dad said, yeah, but it's true for all of you. Like, we just wanted you. And it's the stereotype, Lois, like, you always want your kids to have what you didn't have. You always wanted to do your kids. And my parents are just proud that we're all happy in what we chose. And we went down very different paths. and for all four of us, we've gone down different paths. So I'm the only one who went into business. My brother works in media. My two sisters are teachers, and my parents are just really happy that we're happy, and that's the most important thing for them.
Yeah. And do you have people say, what is a futurist? Like, how do you describe what you do?
That was my question. What is a futurist?
So it's true, Lois. So when I first started doing this, so probably for the last 10 years and actively for the last 8, I've been doing conference speaking as a futurist and doing consulting with senior leadership teams and so on. But at the start of that, very few people knew what that term was. So I didn't even use that. So when people said, what do you do? I would say I'm a technology consultant. Now, it was a lot more. Like, I would actually do a lot more. And it wasn't really about technology either. Part of it was. But if I say technology consultant, they kind of get it. If I say futurist, they have no idea. Now, I'm happy to say I'm a futurist because that term has become much more common now. And even if people say, if I say I'm a futurist, they go, oh, so is it like looking into a crystal ball?
Yeah, crystal ball.
I go, okay, not quite, but what I do is I look at trends. So I look at what's happening elsewhere in the world. I look at what's happening in other industries and how it might apply to your industry. I look at what's happening, what maybe even sometimes what science fiction authors say could happen in the future, and go, oh, I wonder if that did happen, what impact would that have on society? So it's that, rather than actually trying to predict the future, is actually more looking at trends and saying, if that trend happened in your industry, what difference would that make? Yes. And especially now as a futurist, one of the things that's people are asking me now is, given that the future is really uncertain for a lot of people as a result of this pandemic, how do we lead? How do we manage? How do we make plans for this future that we can't see? Because there's some people, especially like even really experienced leaders, they're good when there's a future they can see, even if it's quite challenging. But they're not so good when there's a future, when they can't actually see the future. But you still got to be able to make decisions. Like, it's like when you're walking into fog and you can't see, you still got to make decisions.
True. Yeah.
You can't just say, I'm only going to look at the next 3 steps because I can't see any further than that. You've still, especially if you're leading a team, you've got to bring them along. You don't exactly know what's out there, but you've still got to give them some clarity and confidence that we can move forward, even though we don't exactly know where we're heading.
Yeah. And Gihan, you probably, like I do, get messages or questions from people. I know I've had a question on email or through my contact page of my website recently that was, what's the safest job to choose in the future? I'm about to, select a university course. Well, that was the interesting double question was, I'm going to university. What should I study that's safe and secure for the future? What a question.
Yeah, absolutely, Lois. And I get that a lot, actually. So when I speak at conferences, doesn't matter what topic it is, doesn't matter what industry it is, doesn't matter what the group is, almost inevitably, one of the top 2 questions I get is that one. Like, my kids about to they're doing year 11 or 12, or they're choosing their subjects for year 11 and 12. What should they be doing to make sure they've got a job in the future? And my answer is always, it's not about jobs, it's about skills.
Yes.
In the same way as in my dad's generation, the similar question would have been, what company should I work for to make sure that I have a career for life with that one company? I think it's now, what skills am I going to acquire? Especially those wide skills that are transferable, that I can say, this is going to be useful for me in this job, in this job, in this job. So it almost doesn't matter what job you have. So for example, I think that, I know people, clients and people in my personal life who work in the travel industry. And I really, really, really feel for them if they're travel agents, because of the pandemic. It's something that just could not have been predicted, but that industry is currently wiped out, and it's going to be a long time before that recovers. And there's no way they could have known that 6 months ago. They might have got the first signs of it, but a year ago, there was no indication that global travel, that whole industry was going to be completely shut down. It's not like where we had lockdown for a few weeks and restaurants and cafes that were kind of operating on life support. just doing takeaways and home deliveries, because that's at least they were getting some money in the door, but it was only a temporary problem. And there are other industries that were completely shut down, and you can't predict that. And a year ago, you couldn't have predicted that. And being a travel agent a year ago may have been a reasonable career to be in, a reasonable job to have. So I think it's more really, really important, Lois, that people, and you, I'm sure you say the same, make sure that you've got transferable skills, you've got these wide skills that can apply across different jobs, different careers, because it's not just because of a pandemic. There's going to be a lot more automation, artificial intelligence, a lot more outsourcing, and some of those jobs that you had and the roles that you had in those jobs are going to become obsolete.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
the things that you need are not only those deep skills. You absolutely need the deep skills, but you can't get by if you only have that.
That's right. And Ed talked earlier about mindset. I think that's really, really important. Attitude, mindset, curiosity. But I think sometimes people are asking the wrong question too. So they're almost automatically assuming in that person's case that university is the answer. And you alluded to that earlier. There's so many different ways to learn, but also about fixating on a particular role instead of skills. I often come also with a slightly different lens of who are you as a person, so digging into what makes you tick, and values, personality, your passions, your interests, a whole range of things that make you who you are, your strengths as well, your personal strengths, what gives you energy, and looking at the outside world. And it's just interesting with people talking about what's going to be secure. That's a really, really difficult one, isn't it? If someone values security, really unusually perhaps being entrepreneurial probably brings you more security now. When you said before you were naive to go, I'll jump into business, actually entrepreneurialism is one of those skills, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right, Lois. And I remember very early on when I first started my business, I was looking at, okay, if I'm being pessimistic, the worst case scenario is that after a couple of years, nobody will want websites and I will just shut the business down, and I've added a couple of extra years to my mortgage. And that's the worst case scenario. So I was in a very lucky position when I did start my business. But within about 6 months, I thought I'd never want to go back to that ever again. And the part of the reasoning behind that was because I was talking, like most of my friends at the time were in jobs, because being an entrepreneur wasn't as big a deal at the time. Certainly in my circle, there were very few people who were running their own businesses. And I remember one of them saying, I just don't think I could get over the security that I have now of getting a paycheck every 2 weeks. I don't think I could give that up. And I thought about that, and then I realized that I am kind of getting paid by a number of different people. So if one of them decides to stop paying me or decides not to give me a contract, it doesn't matter, because I've got a whole bunch of other people.
That is exactly
who
right.
do that. And
diversification.
And I've got no problem at all, and I'm not in any way criticizing somebody who chooses to be an employee. Great, that's fantastic. But you're in the position where you've got one person who can decide whether you're going to get paid in 2 weeks or not.
That's
and
right.
Again, nothing wrong with that. But I felt that freedom of saying I've now got lots of other people who can pay me. Equally, the other side of that is that with an industry like mine, where I do a lot of conference speaking, and that whole industry is shut down and it may not come back for months and maybe a couple of years, and that's maybe that more vulnerable as well. It's not like I had one employer who was going to pay me. Say there's lots of industries now that haven't had that big financial impact. So if you work in the public sector, if you work in a bank, if you're working in some other areas, just by chance, because the pandemic hasn't hit those industries, they've got a secure job, and that's great for them. It's really great for them. And again, I think it just shows the unpredictability of our world now, where
completely
some little thing happens and then 6 months later, the whole world's been affected by it. This is not going to be the last time something like that's going to happen. So
speaking of that, what was your thought process, Gihan, when this all started to happen? What was your train of thought? Like, how were you processing it? And did you have a strategy that came into mind, or were you just spitballing it along with everybody else?
So initially, I was following it pretty closely when it was first happening in China, and then in Iran, and then in Italy. And at the time, and before it came to Australia, we were still having events, we were still doing things normally the way we used to. And I
Yep.
remember the last few business trips that I took speaking at conferences, I was I was nervous and I was careful about contact and services that I touched. And my big concern at the time was that I would be letting down clients if I had to go into isolation. And I wasn't even worried about what would happen to me if I got COVID-19. It was more like, what if I was in a plane and somebody in the row behind me tested positive, and then as a result of that, I had to isolate for 14 days and couldn't meet a commitment to another client that I was speaking at the conference the following week. And then, of course, when everything fell over, then I realized that everyone in the speaking industry was in the same boat. Although people do say we're all in the same boat, and I don't think that's true. Like I always say,
No,
we're all in the same storm, and we've all got our own individual boats that we have to navigate.
Yes. Some have a super yacht and some have a rubber dinghy.
Yeah, and sometimes it's just luck, Lois. Some of it's
like
I feel really privileged and lucky that just the way that Nikki, my fiance, and I have kind of built up our resources. We've always been prudent and conservative, and so we've got reasonable financial stability regardless of what happens. And that's partly luck, partly good planning, and there are others who are in a very different situation. And then I think the thing that helped me, Ed, was that I said to myself, what would Gihan Perera advise you to do? He talks about disruption, he talks about change, he talks about working through uncertainty. So it's kind of like taking some of my own medicine, taking some of my own advice. And for me now, it's looking at, rather than being a futurist who does most of his work with speaking at conferences, it's a futurist who goes, how can I help as a futurist? Who needs my help? Who wants my help? And how can I help those people? And it's not going to be speaking at a conference that they're not going to have this year. It's going to be in other ways. So it's kind of like ramping up one part of my expertise while I'm bringing another part down because of external circumstances.
Yes.
So it was pretty chaotic at the start, Ed, and I wasn't exactly sure. And I think, like a lot of people, I was thinking, well, I wonder how long-term this is going to be. Is it only going to be for 3 months? Is it going to be 6 months? Is it 12? And then realizing that that's outside my control. What can I do that's within my control? And then work on those things. And I'm sure that you've had clients as well, Lois, who've been through that. Go, okay, what's within your control? There's stuff outside your control. There's nothing you can do about it. You may grieve for a while, and that's natural. But then how do you get back control? Well, you take the things that are within your control.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and get
lots
proactive.
Lots of resilience.
I mean, the word that I used earlier that I said was overused, but it sort of seems to be the word that most people sort of latch onto is the word pivot. There may be some other better words to use for that, but that's taking the skills that you've got that you can apply to something different. I think that's coming from your wider skill set rather than your deeper skill set. And how have you found, without obviously going into detail and naming clients, how have you found some of your clients have dealt with these changes? Have you seen really major things happen with them, or has it just been incremental changes?
Yes, it's a good question, Ed, because I've seen a range of responses to it. And so like I say that whenever there's a crisis, you go through these 3 stages. There's crisis, recovery, and growth. So when the crisis is when there's a huge hit, whatever long-term planning you have just gets thrown aside, because all you've got to do, what can we do, is just keep our heads above water. How do we survive? And for a lot of businesses, even if their industry wasn't badly hit economically, they would have had to go, send all their staff to working from home. So for many of them, their big crisis was working from home. And they had to scramble to make that work with the technology infrastructure, with the HR infrastructure, trying to manage people who are not in the same office as you, and so on. And then you can get to recovery, and recovery gets you back to where you were before. And I reckon a good business, they get to recovery and then they start thinking about growth. The better businesses, they're proactively thinking about growth even while they're going through recovery. And so I've had some clients like that. I've actually literally had some clients who are still in crisis. They don't know what's going to happen to the industry. They're really waiting to see what happens health-wise, economy-wise, what are the government rules going to be like, when is international travel going to start again, and they're really dependent on that. So they're still kind of managing through crisis, and that's all they can do at this stage. The ones who are looking at recovery, some of them are being proactive and thinking, let's think a little bit beyond this, like how do we grow beyond recovery? And there are others who are being, so I use the term disruptive, and I use it carefully in these circumstances, but I'm more thinking, how do you disrupt yourself?
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
that's
everything's fallen apart. Here's a really good opportunity for us to reassess everything. So it's saying, instead of like the working from home example is a good one, instead of saying, are we going to manage the path back into the office so we can get back to the way things were? Or what if this working from home or working in co-working spaces or employing people in the same time zone but in different countries, what if that just became part of our next normal? So we've proven that we've got the technology to make it work. We've found that we can trust our people even when we can't see them. Surprise, surprise. So what other opportunities does it open up for us? And so I think the best organizations are thinking that way. They've got the luxury of not being in crisis. So I totally get, if you're in crisis, that's all you can think about. But as you're coming out of crisis, some of them are thinking way ahead and saying, how can, this has disrupted us. Instead of putting back all the pieces the way that they were before, how do we create a new map, a new model for how we're going to go forward? So yeah, I've seen different responses to this, Ed, and it's interesting working with people at those different levels. And I think the people with the most foresight, so I had a client recently in Melbourne, and he said, to the general manager of the company, he said, look, our people are thinking about how we get back to the office. And that's all they're thinking about. They're just thinking of return to office. And I want them to think bigger. So can you come in and do a session for us online about big picture thinking beyond just getting back to the way things were? So yeah, there are definitely people thinking like that. And I love working with those sort of people because they're exactly what you said, Ed. They're curious. They're, as you said, Lois, it's a mindset, and they're thinking about their wide skills, and not just let's get back to the way things were.
Yeah, that's great. And it's amazing how many people have been able to do things much faster. And I've even had that as well. Yeah. Suddenly I was asked to do a webinar across Australia, and I was like, yep, okay, I'll use Zoom. I know what I'm doing, I think. And off I went, and it went brilliantly. And I was very relieved, but also really enjoyed it. So it's amazing how much we can do when we actually just have to step in and get on with it.
Yeah, that's right. And it's one of those things, and congratulations, Lois, on doing that, because it's still a big step, right? It's a big step to do that. And some people are willing to take those big steps, and others will just go, let me just step back. Let me wait till things calm down again, and then I'll be happy, right? And there are others who will step into that. So that idea of pivoting, Ed, so yeah, that I actually quite like that word, even though it got overused at the start. When it was first hit and everyone's saying all you need to do is pivot. And I think it got overused because people got sick of going, no, I'm still in crisis. Still in crisis. Don't tell me to pivot and start. Don't tell me to write a great novel. You hear people say, I remember people saying, Shakespeare, when they had a shutdown during the time of the plague, he wrote Hamlet, and that sort of story, right? And other people are going, I can't think about writing Hamlet. I'm just worried about in 2 weeks' time whether I'm going to have a job. And or if I'm a business owner, my cafes, I have to shut down my cafe. I still need to pay lease. I've got other expenses. I've got kids at school. I just can't think about writing Hamlet or baking sourdough. That's not right. And it is inappropriate to tell me to do that. And so I think at that time when everyone was saying pivot, 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 a lot of people go, no, just leave me alone. I'm really struggling here. But I really like that term because pivoting doesn't mean that you have to completely change everything. It may just mean you dial some things up and dial other things down. And it comes back to what problems am I solving for people? So what problems am I solving for my employer, or what problems am I solving for my customer? And if my customer needs a webinar about resilience in next week, then if I can solve that for them, I'll do whatever it takes, regardless of whether I had the skills to do that earlier. And I think that's what you're saying, Lois. You just stepped into it and go, okay, I'm willing to do this because I know this is what people need right now.
Yeah, and I think it's also not overthinking and overcomplicating the change and the adaptation, because that was something I've delivered so many times in person. So there weren't too many moving parts to change, you know. So it's just a little bit of courage and a little bit of work behind the scenes. So you've been delivering a lot online recently?
Yes, I have. Yeah, I have. And again, like I've seen a number of my colleagues, and they've been also switching to a number of online presentations. And again, it's a range of ways they do it. So some people have set up this fancy studio with multiple cameras and great lighting, and they've done a fantastic job with it. And kudos to them, because they're going, this is the way I'm going to look for the next few years. Whereas I have got a much simpler setup at home. And I know that if I get booked for an online keynote presentation, then there's a studio that I can book by the hour or by the half day to do that. So again, people have chosen different ways to solve their customers' problems. And again, it comes back to being adaptable, being flexible, making choices about, in my case, it's a case of whether I rent or buy. And some people have gone down, let's set up this whole studio because we're going to use it every day, and we're going to create all these online courses, and we're going to have other people coming in so we can run it like a TV studio. And they've made those decisions about the way they're going to take their business. So there isn't a one size fits all answer. And that's one of the things I really like. I really love I'm sure, Lois, you've done a lot of work in design thinking.
Yes.
Going,
I love it.
What do customers actually want? So let's forget about what we have. Let's first ask the question, what problem are we trying to solve? And then then design a solution and then test it. So try it, build a prototype, do a test, do a pilot project, see what works, fix it, adapt it, change it, and then try again. And I really like that idea. And there's a lot of lip service paid to that whole idea of customer-centric organizations. But one of the things this pandemic has done is forced many businesses to go, what do our customers really want? If they want delivery and takeaway, because that's the only option open to them, let's pivot and create that opportunity, because create the solution, because that's actually what people want now. Because some people have been forced to go back to basics. And and again, I'm not trying to minimize how hard it's been for many businesses, many organizations. But for many of us, it's forced us to think, like really think about what problem are we solving. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, completely. And so and it sounds a little bit weird, and not discounting what you've just said in terms of that there are many businesses that have had very, very, very tough times, and some that don't exist anymore. That's the fact that they're just not here anymore. Part of it excites me. I mean, part of this whole process excites me because I think it's waking up a lot of people, a lot of businesses, to opportunities they'd never thought of before if this hadn't been pushed on them. And, they may have taken, as Lois was saying, she did in a few weeks what was probably going to be done over a few years in terms of changing her setup and what she was doing. There's lots of other businesses that have done the same thing, and I think they're finding new advantages and new projects that they didn't even conceive of before, that may even end up completely replacing what they'd done, and may be more beneficial and profitable as well.
Yeah, I think that's right, Ed. And it's another question that I quite often get asked when people want to know what's the future going to look like. So another phrase that has been overused is this whole idea, the new normal. Right, and they go, what's normal going to look like in the future? And for me, I say very much it's about more options rather than going back to the way things were.
Next normal.
If you're doing, like if they're retail businesses who've been forced to do online ordering and set up an online store, when things come back to, you can go into a shopping center, or you can go to a physical retail store again, it's not that they're going to get rid of their online store. They're now going to have two options, and customers are going to want both options, because now we've got this whole part of the population segment who've never bought anything online, have had to do it now because either it wasn't possible for them to go out, or they were worried and concerned about going out. They've kind of been forced to do that. There have been people who have been doing payway for the first time, using credit cards for the first time, and they go, oh, actually, it's not as hard as I thought. Again, employers who've had their people working from home for the first time, it doesn't mean everyone's going to come back into the office. It doesn't mean everyone's going to work from home. There could be some combination of it. There could be some people working from co-working spaces, and they'll have other ways of working. And it doesn't have to be that anything gets discarded. It's just going to be more options. And so I think that's where a lot of the things you're talking about, there's a lot more opportunities. So Lois, you're still going to go back and run workshops in person, but now you can also run online workshops and run webinars, and there's going to be demand for all of those options.
Yeah, absolutely. And some work better than others. I think I like what you said about working from home, working from the office, and that there might be a combination. And some people work better in one and others work better in the other, and then a combination thereof. So I think there's a little bit more room for personalization and working to people's characteristics and what's going to get the most out of those individuals as well, which is exciting for people driving their own career as well.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead, mate.
Okay, so one of the things I was going to say was that the other thing that people often say to me is that nobody likes change. And I say that's not true. That's not true. There's a whole generation, possibly 2 generations of people, the Generation Z and the Generation Ys, the millennials, who love change. They're bored if there isn't change. They demand change. And so I think we don't value them enough. And we don't value the skills that they have, especially the change management. Like, I'm a Gen X, so we're Gen Xers, right? And we talk about change management. Like, change is something we have to manage. It's a process that we need to go through. The younger generations, the Gen Ys and the Gen Zs, they don't think of it as change management. Change is just part of their normal life. So again, if I go back to Abby, so again, I was having lunch with Abby once, or breakfast with her, and again, like now I knew that she takes photos and posts them on Snapchat at the time. And so she took a photo and she was doing something with her phone. And I said, so I obviously posting this on Snapchat, right? And she goes, oh, no, we don't use Snapchat anymore because Instagram has got stories. So all my friends, we all switched to Instagram. And I thought, that's amazing. When was the last time there's this technology that I and my colleagues and friends were using, and then something better came along, so we just suddenly switched because it was better?
Absolutely.
Right? We should be doing that, and yet we tend to stick to what we know, and because we know it, and because there's a learning curve to learn something new, and yet here are these teenagers, and Abs was a teenager at the time, who goes, oh, no, there's something better, let's just switch. So so I think we should be open to that. We should be more open to change and more open to learning from the Gen Zs and the Gen Ys, who are just doing it as part of their life. It's just normal for them.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It's fascinating to watch all that change happen just before your eyes, and the pivot and moving from one thing to another. It's all very entertaining to me. I love watching all this stuff happen and move, and I'm always keen to try the next thing. Look, sometimes I do suffer from shiny object syndrome. I think, maybe you sometimes have had that happen as well, Gihan, where you go, oh, that looks interesting, I'm going to try that. And sometimes you need to focus and other times you need to explore. But I think in terms of the term futurist, what are some areas of, and not necessarily just technology, but what are some areas that you see and feel that there's a lot happening in terms of both business, personal development, technology? Have you got some areas that you really spend a lot of time looking at?
Yeah, so look, I reckon if I was saying broadly, I reckon there are 2 areas. So one of them is more like, Lois, if we're talking about hard and soft, so one's hard, one's soft. So the hard one is the artificial intelligence. So AI is big, and it's only going to get bigger.
Definitely.
The way that we, like humans and machines, working together. And there's going to be a lot of jobs that are going to be displaced or changed as a result of AI. But also there are going to be more jobs created as a result of AI. And so for people and machines to work together effectively, that skill of being able to work with computers or with AI is going to be a really important skill for our future. And that's true across industries. regardless of what industry you're in, artificial intelligence is going to touch that in very big ways. And it could be robotics. So it could be like Abby, as a physiotherapist, she's going to have robot helpers in the future. It could be, and it's not going to be like a humanoid robot necessarily, but there will be a lot more robotics in areas like that. And in other areas, in knowledge work, it's artificial intelligence that's going to be managing data, helping you make better decisions and so on. So I think AI, whether it's physical or just in terms of software, that's a really, really, really big area. And the other area, which is like, if you like, one of those soft skills, is work that's providing meaning. So there are a lot of people now who don't look at work as just providing money. So they want their work to be just to provide meaning rather than just money, and they want to have a purpose. And coming back to something you said earlier, Lois, when you said you talk to job seekers about and career, when you talk about career counseling, what do you like, what turns you on, what makes a difference in your life, and then how you're going to choose jobs based on that and careers based on that. And that's become a much, much bigger part of what's going to make a meaningful career and a meaningful life. So I'm sure, Lois, you don't believe in this whole work-life balance, because work is part of your life. So it's not like they're separate things. And now that's going to be a much bigger part of what employers will have to provide. So there's this term, the employee value proposition. I'm sure you've come across it.
That's right.
It's like customer value proposition. What am I going to do that's going to make customers makes me attractive to customers? The same is going to be true. Well, as an employer, what am I going to do that's going to make me attractive to the best people, so that I can hire and keep the best people? And
that's right.
It's not enough to just say, we provide you a good salary. It's about, can I provide work that's meaningful and that the purpose of the organization aligns with my individual passions?
Yeah, massive.
What do I care about? And then can my organization help me do that on a bigger scale? So I think both of those things, Ed. So AI is one, and the other one is just providing meaningful work is going to be huge for the future.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear, Gihan, because that's exactly, funnily enough, when I say, my business name, Career Wisdom, people think I'm the wisdom, like, here is my wisdom. And yes, perhaps a little, but it's also about helping extract that wisdom from others. And wisdom is really about you doing something that's meaningful for you, but that also helps others or the planet or whatever it is your aim is. So that's the true wisdom, isn't it, in finding a career that fulfills you and fills you up, but also does some good out there as well.
Yeah. So it's your passion and the organization's purpose. When those two things are connected, perfect. And employees are looking for that now. And
definitely.
It's not just a tiny group of employees. These are, so the Generation Y, and I think a lot of people still think of Gen Ys as in their young 20-year-olds. It's not. They're now, the Gen Ys, the millennials, they're the oldest of them are in their 40s. They're 40. So they're people who are now in senior leadership positions in organizations. And this is what they demanded 10 or 15 years ago. And this is what they want for their work teams as well. In every aspect of work, they don't want to be coming to the office every day. They don't want to be sitting in workshops or going to presentations where they just sit silently with their arms folded, listening to a presenter at the front of the room. They never wanted that. And now they're in positions of leadership and influence. And they don't want workplace of the future to be like that either.
You're exactly right. Interestingly, when COVID hit, I was quiet for just a few weeks. People are in shock and they're moving and doing whatever they need to do. And then really the first calls and messages I got were mostly Gen Y and looking at what's their next. They're finding their what's next.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't necessarily job shock stuff. I got a bit of that later on as well, and obviously redundancies. But really constantly I've had clients who have been either Gen X or Gen Y, but probably more Gen Y. I actually say that I'm a Gen Y, but I'm in a Gen X body because I actually quite like change.
Nice.
And
I'm going to use that too.
Yeah, it's true of both of you, right? It's definitely true of both of you that you've always been open to change and you've always been willing to try new things, traveling around the world. Ed, I know your diversity of the number of different jobs and different careers that you've had in the time that I've known you as well. Yeah, I like that idea as well of being always open to change. And another thing I will often say to clients is, as I said, when I speak at conferences, there are two top questions that I inevitably get asked. So one of them is, what should my kids do? So they've got a secure job. The other one is, how do I stop my kids from using technology so much? Right? How to get them off their devices? And I say, instead of that, why don't you lean in rather than switch off? So instead of saying, get off your phone, go, what are you doing? Teach me what you're doing. Show me what you're doing. Lean in and learn what they're doing. So my stepson Josh, so Abby's brother, he loves these computer games and FIFA Online, and FIFA Online is not just playing soccer and playing against, like, it's not just on field. It's also about building a team. It's about contracts. It's about, you've got a salary.
Amazing.
Being a player agent almost. Yeah, the whole thing.
Exactly. And
brilliant.
All the skills that you're learning there, again, those are those wide skills. It's not just about fooling around with a soccer ball, which is a good thing in its own right. Nothing against that, but it's learning all these wider skills as well.
Yeah. So, and people are getting recruited. People are getting recruited in that. Like, there's Formula One drivers and other types of racing car drivers that are actually recruited from their top level skills of playing those games online. And because it's transferable most of the time, the skills that they've learnt, they can then use it in the real world, and they find they do very, very well. So I'm all for learn. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the younger people regret teaching their parents how to use certain things, because then their parents are up with what they're doing, and they're on Instagram as well. I know it annoys Sasha sometimes that she's got a technology father, because it's like, go away, leave me to my own space, stay back in the physical world, don't go into the digital. But
I think, Lois, if you're a Gen X, Gen Y, but that's if you
I wish, but it was Gen Y and Gen X body. I wish I was in a Gen Y body.
Well, that's a future we're working on, Gihan. We're looking
definitely. Is there a pill for that?
There's something we can do there. Now, look, we've really enjoyed having you on the show, and we appreciate your time. We have been talking for probably longer than any other guest, and we could probably keep talking for another hour, knowing the three of us. But we're wary of your time. But I just wanted to finish up. And we mentioned before that you've written 10 books, which is mind blowing to me, because I haven't written one. Lois has one up on me on that one. That being said, I have done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of podcast episodes. So that's my book. That's my equivalent of book. Are you working on any others? Do we get a scoop, or have you taken a rest from book writing for a while?
No, I've got an idea in mind, and it's about what we've been talking about. And I'm thinking about writing a book called Flex, which is all about flexible work. And it's not only about the workplace, but it's the consequences of that. So the fact that now people understand that you can work from home and work from an office, but some of the consequences of that mean that you don't necessarily, it's not just about the place, it's about what do working hours mean, who's in your team. Like, if you can recruit people from anywhere around the world, and it might just be for a few weeks, and it could be somewhere anywhere around the world. It might, so now, we all live in Perth, all three of us, and I know Perth has often been talked about as being the most remote city in the world. But think about it now. If you think about that, the gap is not so much about distance, but about time zone. And I think for us, Perth, we're in a great time zone. And so now you're recruiting, not necessarily because of distance, and your team may not be based on distance, but it might be based on time zone. And so, so there's a possibility that book will be coming around sooner rather than later.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. I look forward to reading it, Gihan.
Yeah, thank you.
So where can people get in contact with the world's leading futurist? What's the best way to find you, Gihan?
Well, the best place is to go to my website, which is the name that I was born with, Gihan Perera. So it's gihanperera.com. And you can get all my details there, social media links, email.
Cool.
Always very happy to have conversations. So if you just go to gihanperera.com.
We will put that in the show notes. We'll have the links. We'll also link to some of your books, which I'm assuming are on Amazon and various places like that.
Yeah, so most of them are out of date and out of print now, Ed. So it's only
We'll link to the last
yeah,
one
the
then.
latest
We'll
ones.
link.
The latest ones are there.
We'll put those on there as well. Anything else for Gihan before we finish up, Lo?
I just was enjoying some of your blogs too, Gihan. The last one, like when we were talking about deep and wide skills, that was something I read on your blog. So I commend everyone to check out Gihan's blog as well. He writes very well, very insightfully.
Yeah, thanks, Lois. And I think the thing about a book is that a book, if you write a book, you're making a real commitment. So when I speak at a conference, someone can come up to me a year later and say, "Oh, you said such and such," and I go, "Oh, actually, didn't quite say it like that." Whereas if I write in a book, they can open it up and say, "This is what you said," and I can't say, "Oh no, that's it. You got a done copy of the book." I can't say
that's
that. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
You've got to know your stuff to be confident enough to commit to a book.
Definitely.
And so my practice is writing blogs, being on podcasts, running webinars. And what the book is like a sum of that, and then obviously combining it and making it concise and succinct and focused. But it's very much like it should come from depth rather than just a light book.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's always been my plan when I write a book, is to have deep expertise in that area and then publish it in a form that's easy for people to consume.
Yeah, accessible. That's important.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, mate, we look forward to having you back on when you've written that book to discuss it. I'm sure it'll be well worth a deep dive into that when it's out, as with all your other books. So thanks again for coming on, Gihan.
Yeah,
and,
thanks, Ed. And
Thanks, Gihan.
Thanks, Lois, for being wonderful as usual with all your fantastic questions.
Likewise.
And thanks to you, the listener. Thank you for tuning into another episode. It's been great having you with us, listening to this amazing guy, Gihan, that we've been privileged to know for 20 plus years. And make sure you look him up and follow him. And if you're a business or a company and you want to engage him, you will not regret it. So thank you, guys. Take care. Stay safe. See you on the next episode.
Bye.
Bye for now.